All right, good morning, everybody. Today we are going to be discussing how to create a solicitation or appeal mailing in Bloomerang. And I'm going to have a couple little elements that I'm adding in specifically because with COVID-19, a lot of us are working from home. It's a little unusual to create appeal letters from home. And so I'll try to talk about some tips for that. If you run into anything that you've been experiencing that I'm not getting to, feel free to chat that into the Q&A as well. And we'll kind of see what the community experience says. My name is Heidi. I have been working at Bloomerang for several years, and prior to that had been working at nonprofits my entire professional career. I have done website maintenance, development, event planning, grant writing, served on a board, volunteered, a lot of miscellaneous ways of being involved. Here at Bloomerang, I am the product analyst, so I work a lot on reviewing how customers are using different parts of the product and understanding what's going on out there. Now, today's agenda for this class, we're going to be going over how to prepare a solicitation letter. We're going to be digging into Bloomerang's letter tool, specifically page setup, margins, images, inserting merge fields, using the Ahern audit. A really important element, because we're talking about appeal letters, is using filters to segment our appeal so that we can send out different versions to different groups of donors. We're also going to touch on recording that interaction in Bloomerang so you can go back and see on the person's record that they received the letter. And we're going to touch on the end some of those logistical challenges you might be experiencing trying to run letters at home. John, if you could go ahead and pop open that poll that we were setting up. I just want to kind of ask all of you of these different topics if there's any in particular that you're interested in hearing about today. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the wrong section if I hear from you that you're all interested in a specific area. So let's just go ahead, have that poll up, go ahead and share your feedback. I'm going to go ahead and talk about something else for just a moment here, and then we'll come back to that poll and see what you all said. So just as kind of a background, you're all probably segmenting your appeal letters in your own ways. For the purposes of my class, I'm going to be sending an appeal letter from my imaginary nonprofit to 3 different groups of my donors. I'm going to send one appeal letter to my monthly donors. Then I'm going to send a different appeal letter to my new donors, and finally a third version, which will just go to everybody else. I'm only sending this to my existing donors. It's not a kind of become a new donor appeal. This is just my setup so that the class kind of makes sense. It's not a recommendation that you do exactly this with your own appeals. I'll be getting back to this later as we do the segmentation, but I figure it's a really good starting point for understanding how I'm going to be approaching the letter today. John, how is that poll going? Have we gotten any kind of feedback on what direction people want to go? All right, it looks like we are sharing the poll results here. A couple of you have chimed in. It looks like formatting and design of the letter and segmenting are 2 very important areas for us to make sure to touch on. So I'll try to make sure that I'm giving those plenty of space and attention while we work through it. Thanks very much. Excellent. So coming back to my imaginary letter, those were the kind of 3 groups I'm planning on talking to. A couple of you saying you didn't see the poll. I apologize for that. I am not 100% sure how to use Zoom polls yet, and I think that might be what's playing out here. If you do want to chime in, go ahead and do that in the Q&A, and John will be kind of seeing those as we go along. I wanted to real quick pull up too. I've got this draft appeal letter. If you are looking for advice on how to write your appeal letters and what to say, we have a lot of resources about that. I've just kind of drafted up something from I made up a nonprofit. I love my local nature centers, so I just kind of made a generic nature center, what their appeal might be, and I drafted that outside of Bloomerang just to kind of work out all the language. Basically, you just kind of say like, dear person, you love nature, you love our services, we need help right now. And then I've got kind of the really only difference I'm going to be doing my 3 letters is a slightly different pitch based on who they are. So if they're a monthly donor, I'm going to mention that they're a monthly donor. If they're a new donor, I'm going to mention that they're a new donor. And then for everyone else, I'll just kind of have a generic backup. Then I'm going to thank them. I'm going to let them know how to give. I'm going to include a little signature at the end. So this is just my letter template. We're going to be copying this and putting it into Bloomerang. I do want to highlight for any letter you're sending, if you want to double check kind of like the word count, the sentence length, we've got on our website. So if you go to the Bloomerang website and go over here to freebies, there's the Ahern audit, which is you just paste your text in there, analyze it, and it's going to let you know how you're doing in terms of words, sentences. They estimate it'll take my donors a little over a minute to read this. I'm failing the U test right now. Please write better letters than I do. And I'm at a 7th grade reading level, which is really important. You don't want to be an academic text that somebody's going to be poring over for 20 minutes in order to learn something. I just wanted to flag that this is available on the website so you can use it while you're drafting letters, whether or not you're even sending those letters out of Bloomerang. All right, that's long enough on the preparation. I bet all of you are excited to hop in and see this in action now. Let's go into my database and get started. So this is just my demo database. It has some fake data in it. And in your database, you'll be going over here on the sidebar to the letter tool. I do want to point out there's a distinction between letters and emails. Letters is if you're going to print it, send it in the mail. That's what we're focused on today. We also have an email tool. That would be great if you want to send something to people's inboxes. And we just did a series of classes on that last week. So the email tool is wonderful. I bet a lot of you are using it right now. I'm just focused on kind of the hard copy versions for today. So once I'm here in my letters, I'm going to go ahead and create a new letter. At this step, you're going to get a choice, kind of what's the content of the letter. Do you want to send 1 per person, 1 per gift, or 1 per interaction? I'm going to be doing a constituent letter today. It's perfect for solicitations. We also have transaction type letters. That would be great for thank yous, thank you for the gift to this appeal, or interaction letters, which aren't used as much, but are really useful for things like volunteer or event-based letters. In my case, I'm just sending an appeal letter, so I'm going to stick with the basics and create a constituent letter. I'm going to name my letter. You'll want to name them something that'll keep them organized in your list. When you are on your letter list, you can search for them by name. They're sorted by name. And it'll just help me, since I'm doing 3 versions of my letter, if they all have similar names. So I'm going to do my 2020 Spring Appeal, and this is going to be my recurring donor version or my monthly donor version. The purpose is when you run this letter in Bloomerang, what will the interaction purpose be recorded as for that gift? I happen to have a Benevon database set up here, so I have a couple extra purposes in my database. But in general, as a thank you or as an appeal letter, I'm going to use solicitation as the purpose. Create 1 letter per. The 2 options here are going to be constituent or household. Almost always, you're going to be doing 1 per household. If you wanted to send like both members of the household a different letter, for example, my husband and I are both alumni of the same university. So sometimes they'll send both of us a copy of the letter. I will get my own copy, he will get his own copy. That's where you might use a constituent type filter here. But in general, you're probably going to be communicating with your donors as households. So if you wanted the letter to say, "Dear Heidi and Stephen Atkinson," then 1 per household is exactly what you want. I almost never see people using the 1 per constituent filter. I'm just going to touch on these other 2 settings right here really quickly, but we're not actually going to be using them today. So allowing blank merge fields is great if you have a letter that you maybe just kind of want to print off for your own reference, or even if the person doesn't have information filled in. So if you could imagine, if somebody doesn't have an address and you have a field in your letter to insert their address, allowing blank merge fields would let you still print that letter to do something else with it. Because I'm talking about really the purest form of let's create a letter and mail it out to people. I want it to kind of give me an error message if somebody doesn't have a field filled in. So I'm going to keep that allow blank merge fields turned off. So that's this gray setting here, so that it doesn't print letters that have weird gaps in them without at least alerting me. This second one is actually probably better for that example I just gave of bad, incomplete, or missing addresses. Once again, some organizations are using the Bloomerang letter tool for a lot of creative purposes. Maybe you're making like a little bio sheet that you're just going to print off and hand out at a board meeting where it doesn't really matter if the person has an address. I'm doing a mailing. I want to make sure I'm only mailing people who have an address. I'm going to leave that at the default of unchecked as well for this mailing. Those are my settings. And you'll do that every time you create a new letter. And if you do want to change any of those details, you just come over here in your edit letter screen to the details, and you can change any of that at any time and keep going. That's enough of settings. Let's get into the design of our letter. So I had over here my template letter already. I'm just going to copy that. Bloomerang letters always start with this kind of like thank you letter default. I'm just going to wipe that entire thing out and put in my letter. And then I'm just going to put a couple line breaks in there, make it pretty. Sorry, this is taking just a second here. The reason why I had my letter somewhere else and then moved it over here was so that I could kind of like plan out my language, you know, maybe get somebody to review it with me, and just kind of like do all my drafting and my thoughts in their own space before I came in here to actually like implement it. There's nothing wrong with drafting your letter here in Bloomerang either. I just needed to get us something started. So as you'll notice, like right now, it's just going to say dear name for everybody. Let's talk about adding merge fields. I'm going to be adding in here, instead of just the word name, I want to put in a Bloomerang field. So you'll see in your edit bar this little green button for insert Bloomerang field. And it's got a lot of different fields as options for you. Pretty much anything on the constituent record will be included in this kind of letter. It's a constituent style of letter. I'm going to go ahead and pick their informal name. Let me just click search here. So for example, on my record, this would now say Dear Heidi, and we'll get to a preview step and I can show you how that'll play out. Let's see, where else did I need a merge field? All right, this is my recurring donor letter. So we are going to keep this recurring donor section here and get rid of the sections for new and everyone else. We'll come back and do those two versions of the letter later. But for now, I just want these people to see this. No more merge fields down here. Oh, I've got a signature block. So I wanted to put my executive director's signature into this letter. Probably you're having a hard time getting in touch with people physically so that they can physically sign things. Having a picture of an image of a signature is a really great way to get that in, even if you don't have the ability to kind of like pass the letters around to get physically signed. And with appeal letters where you might be sending out hundreds, thousands of them in general, a lot of organizations don't have the time to be signing all of them in person. If you do, that's amazing. Please keep doing that. But for the rest of us, we're just going to stick a picture in here, not a merge field. Let me go here. So this is our image editor. And I don't have an image selected right now. I'm going to click on this little picture here. This is going to open up my image library of pictures I have uploaded to Bloomerang already. I have already uploaded my executive director's signature. So I'm going to go ahead and select that picture, stick it in here, and then I can just grab these corners and kind of make it smaller, bigger, whatever kind of looks like the right size. I don't have a real signature on file, so I'm using John Hancock, a famous signature. Let me see. So now that we've got his signature in here, we've got our merge field figured out. I've also going to touch on doing letterhead as another way of adding an image. If you've got letterhead on file, like I've had the joy of working at places where we had pre-printed letterhead paper. It was beautiful. You can just print these letters directly onto there. In my case, maybe I got stuck at home without my supply of letterhead. Maybe your organization doesn't have pre-printed letterhead. You can insert images for letterhead into your letter, just like this. I'm just going to select up here, select my images again, go to my image library, and none of these is actually my letterhead. I'm just going to choose a file from my computer that I created by hand. Please have a real designer make your letterhead instead of having me do it. So I'm just inserting that picture in here. You'll see it's really big. I can do the drag thing that I did with this executive director's signature as well, but I just wanted to show you another way that you can change the size on there. So I know that this picture is really, really big, and I can just come in right here and say that I actually want it to be small, about this big. Oh, that's lovely. That's much more reasonable. And I'm just going to center that on my page. So now my letter is looking a little bit nicer, and we are ready to keep going with our formatting. So let's see. So far, we've done our merge fields. We've stuck our signature and our letter in here. And then just in keeping with best practices for appeal letters, you're really going to want to draw attention to different areas. So like down here, I've got a quote from one of my supporters. I'm going to put that in italics. I'm going to make my call to action be bold and underlined here. Please donate to us. You can donate online. We just had a class recently on getting a Bloomerang donation form onto your website. Online donations are pretty big right now. So I want to draw my attention there. Google obviously is not actually the website where they would donate. I just need to stick something in here. And let me see. Let's make this kind of scary part just a little bit bolder as well. So you can always play around with the formatting. You can change the fonts, the font size, the color. I probably don't have a color printer at home, so even having a colored logo is maybe going to come out black and white. But those are some of the editing techniques that I wanted to highlight right here in the Bloomerang editor tool. Let me just pause then, take a sip of water. Do we have any questions on what I've kind of raced through so far that I should go back and discuss more slowly? Let's take a look. All right. Printed letterhead, but need to adjust the margins. Let me go ahead, Amy, and answer that one right now. So if you have letterhead paper, like I was mentioning before, it's probably not going to fit in these default margins on our default editor. I'm so glad you asked about that. We have this page settings button right up here, and you can change any of the 4 margins. So you can say like, hey, I know my letterhead is like a 2.5. Is the space I want between that and my text. So you just go ahead and update that. I'm just going to take that back down. I think in Dorothy's class too, she mentioned too, like she's worked at places that use like legal size paper so that they could have a tear off section at the bottom. There's several different very common paper sizes in here. I'm sticking with letter for mine. So that is a very useful tip for when you are using pre-printed letterhead. A couple questions about other kinds of letterhead. So like this is top-based letterhead. Some of you are mentioning like you might also have a picture that you need to stick in down here at the bottom. It would work very much the same as what we did up here. You just have that picture on your computer. You would come in here and insert the picture. The orientation, this one's always going to be kind of like, because it's on top, up against that top margin we set. There isn't a setting to simply pin the picture to the bottom of your paper. So you'll want to play around with kind of like putting a couple extra enters in there and just getting that location of it as good as you can. Karen's mentioning you sometimes have trouble copying and pasting into Bloomerang. Yeah, I copied this straight from a Google Doc, which can always get a little funny, especially if you're copying from something like Word where it maybe has some formatting applied to it. The formatting does not like copying in general. So what I would do if you're coming from Word or something where you have been like working out your formatting, when you copy it, maybe open up a notepad, paste it into that notepad, which kind of cleanses all the formatting, and then paste it into Bloomerang. And then you'd kind of see what I'd seen there of this very basic, simple design that you then could kind of polish back up in Bloomerang. Adrian's mentioned that you really want some tips on the content of the letter. I am not a fundraising expert, so this is just kind of a sample letter I put together, and I'm very much today going to be focused on the Bloomerang design elements once you know what you want to say. That said, we do have a lot of resources from industry experts on what to say, how to write your letters, how to make a really appealing pitch. And at the end of my slides, which we will be sharing after this, I do include links to some of those resources. So I won't be talking about it a lot today, but I will be lining you up with some of those resources later. Excellent. And just one more before I move on then from Nanda. How do you get the signature to be positioned further over to the left so that it's positioned where you would expect the signature? Yeah, my signature right now is a kind of funny place. I definitely could change my margins, could move things over. I could have this image be a slightly different image. You know, he's got this like J is kind of looping out really far over here. So there's a lot of things you can play around with in that. As far as the positioning, there are some more advanced image positioning options along with the image sizing options. I would definitely encourage you like play around with those and kind of discover if any of them are making sense for you. All right, I'm going to kind of move ahead with another section here. Please keep chiming in your questions. And if I didn't really answer your question, chime it in again. And we'll come back to the Q&A in just a little bit here. I wanted to make sure we spent this time on kind of some basic like formatting tools. There is a lot more you can do with the formatting in here. I definitely encourage playing around with it. You might not insert links. It is a printable letter after all, but a lot of these other tools can be really valuable. We also have a source code element. This is all kind of being built in HTML code. And if you've got somebody like a webmaster or you yourself are really comfortable with internet code, you can come in and play around with this quite a bit and customize it. I don't like doing it that way. I kind of like, you know, just the pretty editor. So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to move ahead then from the kind of design of my letter to who's getting this letter. So I'm going to save my progress here and I'm going to go set up 3 reports with segments. I don't have to do this in reports. I just kind of want to as a demonstration right now because it keeps my brain a little straightforward. But essentially who gets your letter is going to be determined on this filter tab. This right now, all of our letters start out with defaulting to not sending to inactive or deceased constituents and not sending to people who've said do not mail. You can remove those defaults, change those defaults. In my case, like I don't really use the inactive feature very much. I don't know if somebody's maybe marked inactive, but you know, just made a gift last week. So I'm going to kick out that filter. The deceased filter now is the one I'm keeping from there. I don't want to send a letter if everybody in the family or the one person I knew in the family is no longer with us. The do not mail one makes a lot of sense. I'm going to be mailing people. Since this is an appeal letter, I'm also going to add in do not solicit as another reason why somebody should not get this letter. And you'll notice that this list of people, it shrank a little bit. I still have a lot of people on here who don't even have an address on their file. I can, at this point, exclude them here. Because this is our built-in letter tool, it's actually going to automatically exclude them when we go ahead and run the letter. So I'm going to hang them in right now just to demonstrate that when we get to it. For my own kind of sanity and keeping things organized, I often like to exclude people who don't have an address or don't have a complete address as well. And you would do that right here. And I can come back to that later if that's something you guys want to see today. But right now, this is essentially everybody in my tiny little database right now. And like I said, I wanted to send this version of the letter to my monthly donors. And that's why I wanted to real quick pop out of the email editor here and just go look at reports really quickly. We'll come right back to the email editor. You can do all of this in the email editor. But I just wanted to highlight, kind of as a side note, we have created a couple, see I went to reports, new report. We have created a couple new templates in the last week. So we have a bunch of new report templates like your loyal donors, your top donors, your new donors. And I actually have a template here for monthly donors. So I'm going to basically just save this report and say, yeah, these are my monthly donors. I have 3 of them. And I'm going to save that report and call it my 2020 Spring Appeal Monthly Donor List. You probably will do a little bit more finessing. Who's on your list? What are your rules? I just wanted to highlight this and how you can, like, once you've got a report saved, if you've been working on it over here, then I go back to my letters. I go back to my monthly donor letter and my filters, and I'm going to send this letter not to everybody, but to people who are in that report. So I'm going to use the is in a constituent report filter. This is an advanced filter. If you're very new to Bloomerang and just kind of looking for, like, how do I learn how to run letters? Don't be intimidated. This is a lot of fun. I love all the clever ways you can report on things, but you don't have to learn all of the filtering tools in order to get started. And our support team can definitely help you out. So let me see. Here's my Spring Appeal monthly donors. You can see I've made a practice version earlier in the week when I was preparing, but this is the version we just did right now. I'm just going to go ahead and say anybody who's in that report should get this letter unless they meet one of these criteria. So of those 3 people who were my monthly donors, one of them is getting kicked out because maybe he was marked as do not mail, or maybe they were deceased. But I've now kind of set up this segment of my letter of I wanted to send this to my monthly donors, and we are going to go ahead and save that and keep editing. Let me now run through those other 2 groups. So if I go back to my letter list, I've now got one of my 3 versions of my letter. I'm going to make a copy of this to be my new donor version of the letter. So there's my copy. Going to go ahead and open that. I'm going to change the name of it real quick so I remember what I'm doing here. New donors. Like we said, I'm going to say something a little bit different to my new donors. Your new donation. This is a horrible sentence. Please write better appeal letters than I do. Your new donation is great. That's kind of, from what I've heard from the experts, all you really have to do with your segmentation and your letters. The core message, the core need is still the same. You just kind of recognize, like, this person's monthly, this person's a loyal donor. And then this is still set to my filters of my monthly donors. If there were a monthly donor and a new donor, I only want them to get that monthly donor report. So I'm going to take those people who got the first version of my letter and I'm just going to drag that down here. So if they got the first version and if by some quirk of fate they're also a new donor, they don't get 2 letters. Here I'm going to show you a different way of setting up the filters. Instead of going to my reports and creating the list there, which I can definitely do, and we could just repeat this, I'm just going to say right here, the filters here work the same as they do in report, has at most 1 donation. I could change this to be like was within the last 12 months, the last 30 days. You can get really nice and specific with your segmentation. I'm sticking with something really simple right here just to kind of demonstrate the organization of all the different filters. So now I've got a list of all of my one-time donors. Oh, look, there's my husband. Once again, it's everybody who met this filter, but then we're kicking them out if they're deceased. We're kicking them out if they don't want to be mailed. We're kicking them out if they got the first version of my letter. I'm going to save that. And let me go ahead and go back to my letter homepage. Now I've got my 2 versions of the letter, and let me just make my final version of the appeal letter, which goes to everybody else. So this is kind of my, like, default letter. I'm going to say everyone else. You can name your things a little bit more clearly based on what your segments actually are. Once again, they're probably going to need something a little bit different just to demonstrate that you know that they're not a monthly donor or a first-time donor. And then on my filters, just like we did before, if they're a monthly donor, if they're a one-time donor, You don't want to send them this version of the letter, so I dragged that down to my exclusion filters. And I'm just going to set up my filters here that has any transactions. So I don't want to send this appeal letter to somebody who's never given. That would be a separate kind of initiative. They would get a separate letter. This is just here's all of the rest of my donors. So this is my third version of my list. So I'm going to save that. Let me come over and check on the chat right now. Let's see. Can you insert the current date in a letter? I'll come back to that in just a bit because this was an appeal letter. I figured I would just hard type the date for whenever I'm going to print it, just because I'm only running this one time. That said, especially for example for thank you letters, you would probably want it to just auto fill in the date. So there's a lot of date fields available. Today's date is going to just be whatever date it is. So today is April 9th. So yes, you can insert the current date into a letter. Thanks. Good, filters questions. Let me just undo that. How do we exclude people who have no address? Great question. Let me come back to that in just a second once I show you kind of what I promised of how the system will automatically kick them out for us. So, come on, save that name. Did I not rename this one? I did. The name just isn't changing. Let me, real quick then, you've done your work. You've designed your letters, you've set up all the different groups and kind of made sure that each group is getting the right letter, and you are pretty much ready to run these now. I'm just going to start with my recurring donors because that's the one we started on. You would do this for each of your 3 letters. I'm going to come up here and save and preview. So there is this download preview button. It will download just a single PDF with none of the merge fields filled in, kind of demonstrating like here's about where you're going to be on the page. This is great for testing if it's going to fit on your pre-printed letterhead. It's different from this one because this is just kind of like to test one version of the page. Save and preview here is going to start the process of actually running your letters. So this is what I wanted to pause and demonstrate right here. I have 2 people who met those filters for this letter, and it skipped both of them. So we're going to actually have to go over to one of our other letters. So Bloomerang, when it's running letters, because I had that setting to skip people who have incomplete addresses, is going to skip people where their primary address is bad or is incomplete, like maybe you don't have the zip code filled in, or is missing, so maybe they just have literally no address. We're also skipping, once again, because we had that setting up front about blank merge fields, anybody who happened to have a blank merge field. In our case, that's not really much of a person or much of anybody on our list, but those were our settings on who to skip. You can adjust those on your details tab. In my letter, it's skipping both of them. So you can see that design preview again. You can see a list of all those families that it missed. So the Loves have an address, but I have marked it as being a bad address. Rocky doesn't even have an address. So that's why neither of them is getting this letter. This was a horrible example. Let's go back to one of our other letters. So maybe this one, which had a lot of people. Go do that same thing, save and preview. And here you're kind of seeing what might be a little bit more realistic. I had 130 people who met the filters for my letter, and 83 of them were skipped because of these different address reasons. So here, now you can see, here's a list of the ones who are going to get the letter. Here's a list of those people who met the filters, but we skipped, and a little reason for why they were skipped. This is a great checkpoint for you to kind of go through and be like, oh yeah, that's a lot of bad addresses. Like I said, for my own kind of peace of mind, sometimes I just don't want to get all these little error messages back here. It's a great catch. You don't have to do anything, but if you wanted to go back and say, you know, they shouldn't meet my filters if they have a bad address, we just go back to our letter editor, go to our filters, and then down here in our exclude filters, you can add as many exclude reasons as you want. So if I went ahead and excluded bad address here, so has an address that specifically is bad and is their primary address. If their primary address is good, I still want to send them mail, right? and is primary. So this is excluding everybody whose primary address is marked as a bad address. It's going to mean that fewer people meet the filters for my letter, but that's kind of realistic. Once again, you do not have to do this. The letter tool will do this step for you, but it's kind of nice and it feels like you're cleaning up your data. And now look, I'm only skipping 35 people. So you could do the exact same thing then for incomplete addresses or missing addresses, which are two reasons that I'm not going to like kind of fully walk through yet today. Let me see. We also have a question about filters, about organizations versus individuals. So right now I have set this up to please just include every constituent in my database who meets these filters. And as you're seeing, I do have a mix of organizations and individuals. It's very easy for you to just say, I only want to send this letter to individuals. So I'm going to kick out anybody whose constituent type, which is a built-in field you all have in your database, is organization. And that's a great way to just focus your results a little bit more specifically. Sarah's got a question. Can people use alternate addresses, such as if you have vacation addresses for someone who lives in Florida? Great question. The letter tool is going to pull their primary address. So if they're relocating throughout the year, you just have to change which of their addresses is their primary address, and the letter tool is going to be based on that. So if you say their primary address right now is their Florida address, then it's going to be pulling that, printing that, and using that for the letter. That is a process you'll have to do on your own. So if you have a little reminder for yourself that your board members moved down to Florida for the winter, and you just go and change which of the addresses on the record is primary, that will affect which address this letter is being sent to. The letter tool itself is only going to send one letter per person. If you have 5 different addresses on somebody's record, it will be sending them one letter. Let me go ahead then, just scroll through the Q&A just another second. Is there a way to exclude people in a household from the salutation? Asks Miriam. So that is an interesting question. Let me just save my progress so far on this. So this salutation right now, I have as being the informal name. You can pick any of the different name fields. You could filter your letter to, for example, say their formal name, their informal name, the full name. If you wanted to exclude someone in the household from the salutation, the cleanest way to do that is actually going to be going to the household's profile in Bloomerang and updating, for example, their informal name to say what you would like to say in letters for them. If you're doing kind of a blanket rule of this household, I always want to address as Dear Heidi, and I don't want to mention all the names of all the other household members. That's something you would set up when you're filling in the household's contact information. Good question. All right, let me then run through kind of finishing my little process that I started here of saving, previewing. Here we're kind of seeing who's going to get this letter. And at this point, you're going to get a nice big blue button saying run, let's do this. You can click the run. It will prompt another step for you. You can do a test, or you can create your letters. Doing a test will create 5 letters, the first 5 PDFs. It will fill in all the merge fields. You can kind of double check how that looks, test it out on your paper, make sure everything looks good to you. Creating your letters will run it for everybody. So you will have a single PDF then with, in my case, what is that, like 30 different letters. It will put an interaction on everybody's timeline automatically for you with a copy of the letter that they were sent. And it will let you download the PDF. So I'm just going to click Run My Letters. It's going to start running here in just a little bit. If yours takes a little while to run, you can leave. It pops this page if you kind of stick around, and you have the handy dandy little download letters or download addresses here. But let's say like it was taking a while, you had to go do something else. This would be mostly for very large databases. If you happen to not see this screen, you can always get back here from the letter home, which I'm about to show you. At this point, you can download your letters, which is once again a PDF, which you then print. And you can download their addresses, which is going to give you a CSV file with their name, their address. It's sorted in the same order as the letters themselves. So then you can use that if you wanted to print onto labels, print onto envelopes, if assuming you're not handwriting all of your envelopes. Let me just real quickly here go and demonstrate, like if you weren't on that page, if you needed to get back to that, up here you're going to see your 5 most recent mailings. And you can always come back here and download that PDF again, download that CSV file with the addresses again. And you even have this undo button. It says delete, which is a little scary. But all that does is it just essentially undoes what we just did. It's going to remove that interaction from everybody's timeline. If this was a thank you letter, it's going to mark those gifts as unthanked again, just to kind of like reverse what you just did. And it's great for if you kind of like, you started working on it, you were about to print, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I had a typo, or the board member's signature was in the wrong place. You just go delete that mailing, go back, fix your design, change your filters, whatever it is you needed to do, and you just run it again. So even though when we were over here on the preview page and run, it said, do you want to do test or create my letters? If you do the create your letters and you realize rather promptly, like before you run a ton more letters, that there was something you want done differently there, you can undo that mailing. It was a really handy feature. I used it a lot, and we kind of hit it, so I just wanted to make sure to flag that for you all. So that was running a test. For example, if I undid my letter, I said, oh gosh, I was using informal name, but I actually was supposed to be using formal name for this letter. You go fix it, rerun it, print it. When it runs the letters, that file and the CSV file with their addresses is going to be organized in zip code order, which is what the post office likes to get. So if you're ever looking at it and you're like, this is kind of random, they're not in alphabetical order, they are in zip code order. Let me see. I just deleted that. I did want to show you how that interaction looks on people's timelines really quickly. So I just ran my letter. Let's pretend I downloaded it. I printed it. And who got that letter? I don't remember. All right, it looks like Barry got that letter. I'll just show you real quickly here on Barry's timeline what that looked like after we ran the letter. So Barry here now has a mailing interaction on whatever date you clicked run is what date that interaction is going to be on their timeline. The subject of the interaction is whatever we chose to name our letter. The purpose, remember we set that up in our details, and it's got a nice little link here to the specific letter we ran for him. So this has his merge fields filled in. I do want to point out there's a lot of desire to customize. You know, we want to make sure that people know that we know who they are. And if you're not handwriting those customizations in, like, you know, thanks for showing up last Tuesday. If you wanted to type those in, you can always come to people's individual records. Just type in whatever your personal note is, save that. And then you can download this letter on its own and print it again. So that's also a very handy little feature for when you want to be kind of personalizing letters, when you're dealing with more small batches where you want to be typing those customizations in. Let me see. So we just used adding an interaction, looking at the interaction. Let me kind of come back quick and see what kind of questions we've got coming in so far. Let me see. I think I just saw Miriam, you'd asked, and I think John just got to you right before I thought of it, how this would work like with smaller batches. I'm obviously doing this from the premise of doing an appeal letter, which is kind of, you've got a larger list of people. Dorothy's classes tomorrow, she's doing it from a thank you letter perspective, and there is a lot of need, if you're getting only 2 letters a week, like what do you want to do with that? The biggest advantage I can say for why you might want to use the Bloomerang letter tool versus sending those letters like out of Microsoft Word, for example, would be that when you're using this letter tool, it is automatically saving that interaction onto their timeline. It is automatically including a picture or, a copy actually, not a picture of what that letter is. So if you ever wanted to come back to it and say like, hey, did I send that thank you letter? Did it mark the gift as thanked? All of those little extra steps get handled automatically when you're using the Bloomerang letter editor. And that's really nice and convenient. So that there is a nice case for doing this for smaller batches of letters as well. Ellie, you say we would email the PDF files and the CSV for envelopes. So let me go back to that. So like when we ran our letter, right, we have a PDF, which is, you know, all 30 of my letters. You would then print that. And you would take the address information. If you're going to be printing that onto an envelope, you would use this using kind of a mail merge process with whatever your editor is for your labels or your envelopes. And then you would print those. If you are emailing people, you probably wouldn't be using this letter editor at all. You'd probably be using the email tool. So I'm not going to get a lot of depth into the email tool today. We have some great classes on that. You can be emailing out thank yous, for example, but this is mostly with the intention of I'm going to be printing the letter out. Miriam, yeah, you're using words, scanning, attaching letter. Yeah, especially if you're really attaching the letters to the donor profiles. Using the Bloomerang tool is going to save you a lot of steps. There are some, you know, some balancing acts you're going to have to make, like maybe in Word you were using a really special font that like your designer really loves, and maybe that's not one of the fonts in Bloomerang. But I think then you just kind of find that balancing act of what's helping you the most, what's helping your donors the most, what's helping your fundraising the most, and the efficiencies you get from using this are really nice. Let me see. All right, I'm going to actually skip somewhere else then, show off. I've only got like 9 minutes left, and I did want to make sure to touch on a couple more things before we reach the end. I will be coming back to questions in just a little bit. With addresses in particular, there's such an important area with sending physical mail, especially when you're sending it to individuals. I think I've seen some statistics from the post office, like 1 in 6 people moves every year. So over the course of time, your addresses are just going to be like more and more out of date. Bloomerang's set up about a year ago, it's almost its 1 year anniversary, a free integration that you can turn on in your settings. So I'm going to show you where to do that to get US Post Office national change of address updates on your database records automatically every night, so that you always have the most up-to-date information that the post office has about where people live. To turn that on in your database, you just come down here to your settings. Now, only administrators can access settings, so if you happen to not be seeing this from this point on, it just means you're a standard user instead of an administrator. Check with one of your admins, have them turn it on, you know, hound them until they do. So we're going to just view all my settings. We're going to go up here to the My Organization settings. And I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of this list where it says NCOA. So there's a company we're working with called True Givers. I've already actually turned on the setting for this demo database. Oops, my bad. But there's just a button here and it says turn on. You just click that. They will start reviewing all the addresses in your database, and if they find fresh updated information from the post office, they will push that in. They have tons of options. How do you want it formatted? Do you want information about whether the person is deceased as well, which I think you would probably want. And then they have this lovely little NCOA dashboard, so you can kind of go over to the True Givers website, and they have all sorts of in-depth information about the quality of the address information, the contact information in your database. Once again, this is a demo database. The information in it is pretty weird, but it's a really great integration. It is included for free with your Bloomerang subscription if you have a standard subscription. If you do not have it turned on, you should probably turn it on. It's going to really help with all of your mailings. Let me see, that was kind of an in-app tip I wanted to touch on. And then, like I promised, I did want to get to some other resources outside of Bloomerang for sending your mailings. So a lot of us are sending mail from home. And I'm definitely not an expert on this. I have had to like prepare appeal letters from home before. Just some of the things that we've touched on during this class that you'll want to have as considering as you're working on this then are kind of what resources do you have available? Do you have pre-printed letterhead? Do you have it at home with you? Do you need to print an image of your letterhead onto regular paper? Depending on what printers you're using, you might want to evaluate, are you using color printing? Are you kind of stuck with black and white printing? Is that going to change the design of your letter just a little bit? Appeal letters in general don't often get live signatures just because of volume. Like we said before, if you can, that's amazing. Definitely do that. But including the image of a signature is great for even if you were doing live signatures before and you're just having challenges getting the right people, having the right supplies in the room in order to do that, you can always kind of use as a backup an image of a signature. You all know this, but you can order your supplies online. And I did want to just mention too, envelope moisteners are amazing. And with all of us being a little bit sensitive about contact right now and exposure, it's just a nice way to make sure you're not, licking envelopes. I also wanted to mention, because when you're running those letters, it creates a PDF. If you want to run the letters, but you've got a volunteer who's got like an industrial strength printer at their home or even a regular printer and wants to help out, you can send them that PDF and then they can do the printing and the envelopes and the stuffing the envelopes and help with that. Once again, kind of what's a good fit, what's a good match, how can you kind of share the load while we're all working remotely. Those were kind of my tips for working from home. If any of you have come up with some really clever things with running letters from home, go ahead and share those. Yeah, be careful not to use glue sticks. This is just a water bottle here, so it's just for moistening the envelope. Thanks. Yeah, learned that the hard way with volunteers. Do not glue your letters to the envelopes. Excellent point. Let me see. And then I had some of those resources I'd promised as well. We have a lot of Bloomerang resources. So in your database, there's always this question mark up here. You can chat in, you can email in. The live chat is amazing in real time. We've got a lot of help articles on using letters, on running reports, on filters. So I've got some of those included in the slides that we'll be sending out. Like I said, too, we've got a lot of different webinars. We've got thank you letters. We've got solicitation segmentation, more deep dives. I'm including a link to that as well. They're also all up here in the help and video section. And then I think we'd had that question at the beginning about like, what should I say? What should my appeal letters be? And I've got some of resources, a lot actually from Claire Axelrod. It turns out she's one of my favorites. That we've collected on the Bloomerang website about what to say, how to organize it. Claire puts together some really great resources for like, did you do this? Did you do that? Is your need really clear to people? Are you using the right kinds of terminology? So she's got a lot of great resources there. And then on this next page, I've just got some resources from the post office themselves that I found while researching a lot of things about like their current updates for their business customers, which would be people like us who are sending out from our business, their advice for residential customers. So, all of us obviously are residential customers ourselves. But what are your donors going to what advice are they getting from the post office right now? And they have lots of ways that, if you just need to order more stamps, if you need to be printing your postage at home, just lots of clever little techniques for how to do that. All right. I had another poll that I want to put together. Some of the things we've been talking about are available for everyone, like all of our paying customers, all of our standard customers have access to the email tool and access to the NCOA. If you don't have access to the email tool, if you don't have access to the NCOA tool, it probably means you're on a discount plan. Similarly, all of our customers have access to the free live chat, the free email support, but we also offer phone support. We offer personal training services. So John, if you could just pop that open, I want to put a poll out there. If you're interested in potentially talking with somebody about purchasing some personalized services, about possibly upgrading your service to access some of these other tools that I've highlighted today, I think there's a poll showing for that right now. No pressure. They're just some additional resources. I think our free resources are amazing, but these are just some things that I want to make sure that, like, if that's the right fit for you, that you're aware of it, that you had an opportunity to let us know if you're interested in that. Once again, this recording, these slides are all going to be made available later. And let me just see if I can get through a couple more questions in this last minute before I have to wrap up for today. If we don't get to any of your questions today, please go ahead, just pass them along with the support team, and they will be able to help you out for sure. Let me see, what remaining questions do we have? Will the webinar be sent? Yes, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar in the next couple of days. Organizing your letters, yeah, so like what I showed here, I only have a couple letters. This is a test database. Oops, that's my reports. I only have a couple letters here, but you can definitely be using the name of the letter to group them all with each other. You can filter based on like, oh, I just want to see my appeal letters. Whatever kind of naming structure works for you is a great way to keep your letters organized. And tracking the responses. Yeah, if you're sending out like a spring 2020 appeal, you can create an appeal code in your settings. And then when gifts come in, you can just mark those gifts as being related to that appeal. You could get really specific, like this was in response to the monthly donor appeal letter. You can keep it more generic of this was an appeal letter overall. You just want to be consistent and you want to be trackable with what kind of information you're going to be wanting to report on later. That's all the information I had time for today. Oh, I can fit one more in from Sarah. Is there a way to put ask amounts on a record and then insert them into a letter? That is a great question, yes. So in your settings, if you create a custom constituent field for like how much do I want to ask this person, then you can go onto their constituent record, fill that in. For example, on Barry here, I could say like I want to ask him for, let's just pretend this was my field, for $1,000. And then as long as you've got that information filled in on their records, when you are doing your letter itself, I keep clicking the wrong place. When you are preparing your letter design, you can insert that right here. So like here I've got a merge field for informal name, and I can just stick in a merge field for that ask amount field that you might create in your database. I don't have one right now. Oh, I do. There we go. So you can kind of do that. You just want to make sure like the formatting is all good, put a little space right there. Maybe don't underline that. But absolutely, if you've got a custom field on their record, you can merge that into your letters then. And you can fill the custom fields in using the import tool. You can type them in by hand, but it's just a really great way to really kind of customize it just that one step further. So this letter then could have their name and a personal ask amount. All right, great question. We are going to wrap it up for today. If we have not gotten to your question, once again, go ahead, let somebody else on our team know. We will try to be following up, and you will be receiving a recording of this session. Thank you very much and have a great day.